Hello and welcome, Garry Staines, to the Healed Approach podcast.
Hi, Rebecca. Thank you for having me here today.
No, thank you. I know that we've had a few conversations before today, and I think so inspiring that I had to have you come on the podcast.
Oh, wow. No pressure there then. I'll have to carry on being inspiring. And I think the word inspiring gets used a bit, and passionate as well. So I'm certainly passionate about what I think we're going to be talking about. So.
Well, I think that's it, isn't it? I think from one passionate person to another. And it's not just about what you're doing now, it's about how you got here, I think. Okay. But do you want to just explain briefly about what you're doing at the moment? Talk a little bit. I know obviously you've got your main business, which is the GSQ Brickwork, yeah?
That's right, yeah.
And then you've also got Site Ready Solutions.
That's it, yeah, it's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, I was just really worried I wasn't going to remember. So do you want to just briefly explain what they are about for anybody who doesn't already know?
Yeah, the two businesses are aligned because they're both in construction. And I guess really the new business, Site Ready Solutions, comes from the history of where I am now. So I often say that I'm just a bricklayer, and I like to say that because we're all just someone, I guess. And I was very lucky because I became a bricklayer. My family were bricklayers. My dad was a great bricklayer and employed many. So I grew up looking at that and thinking, that's what I want to do. That sort of I had that great opportunity. Fulfilled it by then going on and employing many others. In between, done many other jobs. Got involved in music industry in one way or other as well, which gave me a different insight. But sort of lots of experience brings wisdom, and then it's time to sort of start sharing it. So that's when we started opening up a business, which is loosely a training business.
Yeah, and I love that, and I think that's how we first connected, is because I was talking a lot about apprentices, and then you came onto my radar. So can you tell us a little bit? I mean, you say it's loosely a training school, but can you tell us a little bit more about your mentoring? So you do your mentoring scheme.
Yeah, so I think what we're looking at is I think when we looked at what needs to change, because we do really need to change the apprenticeship and skills.
Yeah.
It then led on to looking into actually what apprenticeship stood for. And I think really when you look at apprenticeship as a historic thing, that it was actually always led by a mentor. There was a term master, which is not necessarily a word that I like, but I like the term mentorship. And I think really where we've gone now is the apprenticeship's missing that part. So we've looked at people that sort of lead into construction, and naturally we're going to believe that they're going to become apprentices. It's sort of like maybe a lazy way of looking at people that are coming into the industry. But apprentices don't work unless they have mentors. And that is really a very simple way why it's broken. And it leads to this whole skills gap crisis we've got, which, it gets worse by the day. And it's been with us for a hell of a long time in history. So,
and across industries.
So, yeah, exactly. I think, it's not just in construction or brickwork. And I think, where we've lost it is the mentorship. I like a mentorship to be in coaching, because maybe we need to look at a more of a way of what a coach does as well, because they can support people, they can lead by example, and along the way they mentor that person. So I think that's really one of the real big key parts of what we're bringing mentorship into. And Site Ready Solutions, when we was looking at as the idea of what we was trying to do, certainly to challenge and change, but we come up with some nice little taglines of sort of attract, train, place and retain. And, that's kind of quite a wide sort of area of things we're going to do. But we also say we're not a training provider. I can say lots of things we're not, if you like, because it's a collective of all the things that actually need to be, that we need to be.
Okay. So when you say you're not a training provider, just for clarity, you're placing the apprentices with mentors that are going to obviously help to retain them, I guess, in the industry, because this is it, isn't it? I mean, I don't know off the top of my head. I did look at the statistics yesterday, but we're not retaining, you'll probably know, we're not retaining apprentices, are we?
No, not at all.
No. And I think you're right. I think this mentorship is a big, is a big reason for that. And I mean, what I guess for me, something that I see a lot of is businesses, industry, struggling a little bit to provide that mentorship. And why,
Yeah, I think maybe there's a little bit of people lacking confidence in the workplace there, and I think probably more importantly, the time and the money that costs.
Yeah, I think that's...
I think the new government is making lots of really good noises about the change they're going to be bringing, and we're still waiting for some of that. And certainly with the foundation apprenticeship, it's going to be interesting to see what that looks like. But I think the support we really need is some money investment into mentorship, and supporting work, put the employers to do that.
Yeah.
I think we spoke before about the skills gap and the collection of where it comes from. The employers have lost trust, because also the employers have not really got the money to actually put that investment in. I think we're in a time of survival rather than thriving, if you like. And so, running a business myself where, you've got a big payroll there, are you going to invest in more people?
Yeah, and I think also, I don't know if this is something you've experienced, but I think there is also this underlying feeling that apprentices, and by the way, I want to say that actually I think the majority of apprentices are actually 25 and over. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think we can look at it that it's a young thing. I think we got to get the language of that right.
Yeah.
So I think maybe as an apprentice, as a new entrant, it can be at any age.
Yeah. And I think that's a narrative that we need to shift a little bit, because I think that there's this idea that if you're an apprentice, you're early on in your career, and you're potentially younger generation, and I think that there is this underlying feeling that the younger generation don't want to work, they don't want to graft as hard as perhaps older people in the generation, the older generation. Exactly. And I think we need to break down, and for me as well, I think A, it's not true, and B, if you're feeling that way, then maybe it's about looking at the systems and the structures that you've got in place within your organisation that maybe are no longer fit for purpose.
Absolutely. So there's a big disengagement for new entrants overall. I think we live in a world where it's a bit of a race to the bottom. How cheap can we do it? And that's why we've had the mentors being taken out of the equation, as it were. And I think we've relied on our education system to get it right, So,
yes.
And this is
there's another podcast.
Well, this is we look at FE as a term, as further education. So, in construction times, we're giving people more education when they didn't like it in the first place. You could be a good construction worker at probably 14. It's and those days have obviously changed. But we need to find a way of getting people into an accelerated place, into an apprenticeship. But I think there's dangers there as well, because if you accelerate it too much, then that whole mentorship goes, if you like.
Agree,
so there's a balance to be struck.
Yeah.
And I think so. When I said I'm not a training provider, we're working with some very good training providers, and my plans is to work with stakeholders and people like yourself. People that get it, people that can actually bring the change and inspire others. I think we need to keep talking about it, but we need some action as well, and that's what the business is doing. So.
100%. I think that's a really key point there as well, is that we need action, because there are a lot of people talking about a lot of things and not always action being put in place. But that's what we're here for, Garry. That is exactly what we're here for. And just to touch on as well, because we touched a little bit on the education system, but I think much as the education system is no longer fit for the modern world that we're working in, I think that's also the case when it comes to apprenticeships.
Oh yeah. Without a doubt. Yeah. And I think simply because if you're left alone, that's what's going to happen. Yeah. And I think it's seen as an answer at the moment. Let's get more apprentices, and I think that is far from the answer. Let's get more people into the workplace. Yeah. That is the answer we need.
Upskill people, skill people. I think bringing other people in from other industries as well with transferable skills. I think it's just opening our mindsets to it all.
Without a doubt, I think it's sort of globalization has brought great success for us all as individually and as a country. But I think the local people have been left behind a little bit, and I think somehow we got to blend the two a little bit more, because when I would go around to a lot of colleges and areas where there's quite big unemployment, there's lots of people that actually want the opportunity, but they just 100%. Can't actually get in.
Yeah.
So let's get them in and let's support them from that journey, and then I think we'll all be successful. I think it really works really well. So if you can be bringing in people working locally because you've got more pride in the civic area. I think with housing, if you're going to build new houses, it's got a lot be better to push back against the NIMBYs by employing local people, if you like. So there's I've gone off on this bigger mission we've got, but. That we've got to bring some change.
I think that's a really good point as well that you made there about working locally, working with and not just for that sense of pride. I think also because we've got to think about our carbon footprints. You know, we've got to think about how we're going to build greener and better. And I think that's a big part of the solution as well, I think.
Yeah, I think that's where our two worlds definitely collide in sustainability. The carbon offset of working locally is massive, because you by cutting the commutes, you're going to be putting less carbon in the air. But also, you're far more productive if you're working locally.
Yeah.
You know, who wants to be driving or commuting for over an hour a day when you could be working locally? You know, there's obviously a big push for working from home. In construction, you can't do that. You know, if you're working from home, you can make £1 million in a minute with an idea. But on a building site, you've got to be a bit hands-on. You've got to swing the hammer, as it were.
And I think, you know, I think just in terms of, you know, there are certain, you know, job roles within the construction industry where you're right, you know, you can't be working from home. However, I think it's not just the fact that you can't, it's also the fact that we need to remember that we need that human connection as well. We need to have that, even when it comes to mentoring as well. How are we going to mentor our younger people on teams? You know, it's just not going to happen.
Exactly. And I think I love the philosophy of each one teach one.
Yeah.
And it is as simple as that, you know, for every person in a workplace, if they have someone that they're bringing along and sharing that wisdom, that is really going to make the difference.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, let's face it, good employers do that anyway. And that's probably why there's some employers that are successful. I think really in my actual industry and my sector in bricklaying, it's kind of hard to do that, because there is this big push to make money, to lay as many bricks as possible at sort of almost the lowest price, particularly in current market. So that's not helping. So, you know, I've been working a lot with the house builders and saying, look, they need to be looking beyond the current bottom line and look at that little bit of extra investment, how they can help their supply chain, because at the moment the supply chain is not much of a barrier to entry, you know. No. But if you're not training anyone, you shouldn't really be in the supply chain.
Yeah, and I think that's a really, really, really good point as well. And I do want to also touch on, you know, your philosophy and your approach. I know from conversations that we have, you're quite into stoicism, and you take that approach within your mentoring. And I think, you know, what does that look like? And also as well, I'm really intrigued to know kind of what brought you on that journey.
Well, yeah, stoicism. So, it's something that maybe a lot of young people probably wouldn't understand.
Yeah, exactly.
And probably a lot of people that probably wouldn't have heard of. And I only found out about it around about 5 years ago. It came from a moment for me when I was struggling with alcohol and drinking, and you know, not a massive struggle. You know, a little bit of a middle lane drinker, which sometimes maybe steps into the fast lane, and wanted to make a change. So really. And going into that world, you know, you get led by people that mentor you in that space, and again, that sense of connection. And that's how I found stoicism. And it was kind of like it's a philosophy which gives you really great strength, because, I mean, the main concept of it is you can only control what you can control.
Yeah.
And, you know, the external matters are down to the things, you know, only, you know, it's simple as that. But it's the virtues of wisdom, courage and moderation and justice, you know, kind of have always been within me, really, and when I was thinking about my history as growing up, they're all four things that I could really sort of like really connect with already. And I guess where the one with training comes through the most is the wisdom part of it, you know, because wisdom is our history. You know, a new entrant hasn't got that wisdom in the workplace. So I think, you know, I'm sort of trying to introduce stoicism into our training. But I think if you get we've got actually today live, we've got a couple of 16-year-olds starting with Ready Solutions today. And I think if we went in and said, right, we're going to talk about stoicism, we'll blow their minds, you know. But I think, and I think they'll switch off as well very quickly. But maybe it should be something introduced at school as well, you know. Yeah,
well, I think there are a lot of things that should be introduced at school, and it doesn't have to be introduced as a concept, you know. It can be shown, it can be demonstrated, it can be modelled, you know.
Yeah.
And I think, say, within the education system, you know, again, we could go off on one, but, you know, I think we need to be, you know, encouraging children much more to be more self-aware, to recognise and understand the things that they can control, and, you know, and how to...
It's gaining that confidence in the school place. And I think... I'm not quite sure where the ego kicks in, but I think it comes in when you go to senior school. And I've talked before about that when you first went to senior school when you're 11 or 12 and you're looking around that classroom. And there's maybe, you know, depending on how confident you are at that moment is really where your development follows. So the ones that may be really confident, if we could all visualise what we were when we were that child, as it were. And
externally confident, internally not at all.
Yeah, and I'm that person as well. So there's this, you know, I sense that I wouldn't necessarily say I'm bipolar, but I'm bi something. And, you know, in a respect of, yeah, I'm lots of different things, you know.
Aren't we all?
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's a really important thing that we don't necessarily teach our children either, is that there can be lots of different aspects to who we are, and that's okay.
and also in that way, there's no straight line to success.
Yeah.
You know, there's going to be lots of challenges, and I think it's the challenges which actually make us stronger. So, and you know, with the training as well, you know, we really need to challenge people and get people uncomfortable. And I think the you know, again, for him, where I think it's gone wrong at the moment, if you're going to learn bricklaying, you go to a college, and that's a place of no consequence. By working alongside someone in the workplace, you're going to understand how you're going to change that dynamic, because, again, working as a team, you know, so we've, at Site Ready Solutions and GSQ Brickwork, we don't work in just an each one teach one sort of team. We work in a slightly broader, so it then becomes a team dynamic that you've got a you know, collective of people, but they're all working towards that common goal, i.e. building someone's house and building it, you know, to the best quality you can, but also doing it in quantity, you know, being productive for the modern days. So.
And I think that's a really key point as well, is that all of this, you know, leads to more productivity, surely.
Absolutely, and I think this is, I think the and again the new government, and they've been really making some great positive noises, and you know, like I say, I want to say that I'm bipolitical, that I do swing both ways, because, you know, both of all sides have got some great things to add to the political arena, but. The change that's coming is going to be, if they can invest into actual employers to be able to sort of really support the young people that are coming in, or the new entrants, is going to make a real big difference. And I think, you know, the employers need to be ready. We need to be ready as the grown-ups in the room, really, to actually look at, right, how can we, what can we do? You know, what change can we bring? And, you know, I think we've talked before about social media and the people that go on and put loads of hate and all the things, you know, all of the negatives rather than all the positive opportunities. And so we need to be out there really sort of starting to sort of grab back people's attention and saying the power of the possible.
Yeah, and I think that's, you know, it comes down to taking personal responsibility, doesn't it?
Exactly.
You know?
So, you know, we can't blame others. You know, the government should govern. You know, I joked before that rock and roll was not a government-led initiative. You know, it came from a place of struggle, and it came from a place of we wanted to change. So the people changed it themselves. And if you look at that, how rock and roll came about, it was only a slight tweak of the past music that was out there, if you like. So that's what I'm trying to do with Apprenticeship. If anything, I want to be the rock and roll to apprentices.
Love that. I love that. I think, and just to add to that before we wrap it up, I think, you know, two really key points there. The first one is that, you know, it doesn't have to be huge, monumental change. It's small tweaks over a period of time, isn't it? And also the power of coming together, what that can create. No man ever on their own changed anything. It was how we did it collectively. And I think there is also this idea that, oh, well, if I just do this one thing, it's not really going to make that much of a difference to everybody else. We hear a lot about that when it comes to sustainability and our footprints and recycling. Oh, what difference am I going to make when the big corporates are doing this? No, we all need to take individual responsibility, and we all need to make sure that we need to work together and make, you know, steady change over a period of time.
Absolutely. So it's the ripple effect. And together we can, you know, it's something I use a lot, you know, again, and so if we're in a room and we're
together
all sort of together we will, together we can, and together we will. And I think, you know, there is that real shift as well, because we can all stand in a room and present and say what everyone's not doing. But if we can come together and again, remove ego out of it, which is, again, is a big sort of a bit of a stoicism thing, you know, the ego's the enemy. So we got to work together. And that's kind of sometimes hard within business, because, again, in business, it's often a competition and there's a protection in that.
And I don't always think that we always understand when our ego comes to play. You know, I always say that it's, you know, the fear that you get for standing up, the fear that you get for talking out, it's your ego. It's your ego talking.
Without a doubt, yeah.
But the world needs you. It doesn't need your ego. It needs you.
It's, and I think, we kind of met also via, a social media platform like with LinkedIn where, the balance there is really set really right at the moment because there's probably more people that are actually wanting to work together and have got lots of positive stuff. So I think, connecting with the right people on there, you still got to listen to the haters,
Yes.
but, push back and let's connect. And, I think, sort of, again, there's many of like-minded people out there to actually bring the change. And I listen to lots of podcasts and I do lots of reading, and it goes again back to the wisdom. We need to be seekers. If we're going to create change, you've got to seek change. And and again, a lovely sort of stoic type of way of be a scout and not a soldier. Soldiers stand there and be shot at. A scout goes and seeks. So seeks for the change. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Garry. Thank you for bringing rock and roll to construction. And all I can say is that I'm really excited for what the future holds, what it looks like, and hopefully, doing some work together in the future. So
excellent. Will do.
Thank you.
Thanks
so
for
much.
having me. Thank you. Bye bye.